Hello friends, welcome to the final tutorial for Backbone.js. This last tutorial will be covering AJAX. Uh, this isn't exactly the last tutorial, this is the last tutorial in this series, but then later on I'll be making an application and stepping through that with you guys. But this is the tutorial for learning about Backbone.js, not for making an application with it. Anyway, to get things started, we pulled in our jQuery underscore and backbone as usual. I also created a basic model and collection right away. Also, in each constructor, I created an event handler for all events. It'll just do a log saying what the event was, just to help show all the events that happened during the process and everything. So first things first. Backbone.js uses a RESTful API for their synchronizing with the server by default anyway. You can easily, I wouldn't say easily because it's not exactly the easiest thing in the world, but you can overwrite their synchronization methods and everything should, you can get to do it however you'd like. But I'm going to be showing you the defaults. It's going to be a little different because the server I'm working with isn't RESTful. But I'll be showing you ways to get around that. So the first thing we need to do is discuss REST a little bit. Backbone.js does it slightly differently than what I've seen in the past. So anyway, we need to do our CRUD operations. So C stands for create. And when you do create something, it does a post. Now, sorry, pardon the sniffles, I got a little bit of a cold. Luckily, this type of virus isn't contagious over the internet. Anyway, so it'll do a post. I've seen other ones where this one, where creating does a put. Either way, Backbone.js does a post. For reading, it does a get, just like everything else. For updating, it does a put. Other places I've seen do posts, so create and update were opposites. And then delete does delete for the HTTP method. And that's how you know the operation that's going on. So instead of sending to model create.php or whatever, and then model read.php, instead it'll just do to one URL, and then it'll change the HTTP method to determine what is actually being done at there. So let's get down to it a little bit. First thing I need to do is set Backbone up because I can't use the RESTful API. So we need backbone.emulate HTTP equals true. So what this will do, instead of actually sending those HTTP headers, my server doesn't support put and delete. So for gets, it'll send a get. For posts, it'll actually send a post. But when you try to do a put, it'll do a post, but then it'll add a parameter called underscore method, and that will be set to put. And then same thing with delete. It'll be a post, and the method will be set to delete. So now my server supports that. The other thing that Backbone.js does for the RESTful API is it'll send the data as the content of the request. My server, once again, does not support that. At least I don't know how to use that data in my PHP server, so I do emulate JSON equals true, and once again that will convert the data, so it'll send like a full model object. This time it'll send it as a parameter instead of as the content of the request. Alright, so let's actually do something now. First, for the models, what we need to do is set up a URL root. This will be the beginning part of your URL when you try to do anything with the server. So when you tell it to save or delete or whatever, it will go to this URL, but it also adds in something else. The default, well, here, the other thing would be it would look for this.url and call that. And what the default one does is it'll just add a slash and then the ID of this model, which makes sense, except I need it as a parameter like this. So what I did is created a function, and I'll grab it from over here. And so this does essentially the same thing, except instead of just throwing /ID, it'll throw ID equals. This is an important part, because if the model is new, then it doesn't have an ID set, so you just use the base for the URL. And otherwise, if it does have an ID, or is not new, meaning it is on the server, it will use this URL with the ID equals. So that's what we need for that. So let's just start with a model. Make one. Our person equals new person. Now, we're going to send in some data. We'll do name Josem, age 23, almost 24, but not quite. Anyway, so we just created our new person. Just make sure for sure that nothing's going wrong, no errors or anything. And we can type in person and it'll show up. Cool. So now we want to persist it to the database. Now we could do person dot save, and that will do. I'll show you what it does. So notice it has change ID, because when you save it and it's new and doesn't have an ID, it gets an ID from the server. At least your server is supposed to do that. So let's go look at the request itself. Headers. So it is doing a post, and notice there is no underscore method parameter. It is just the model, and it's just sending in the data that we have, the JSON of this model in. So that's about it for that. Now, if we had put an ID on here first, say ID of 1, and tried hitting save, See what we get. First off, you'll notice it didn't change the ID because it doesn't need to, because it has it. And down here, you'll notice it changed the method to put. It also added the ID equals 1 onto the end of the URL because of this. See, is new basically just checks to see if you have the ID. Since it was new before, it didn't have the ID, so it just returned the base. But it is new now, or is no longer new, because it has an ID, so we added the ID onto that. Strictly speaking, we don't really need it for this, because the ID is included in the model data. But you will need it for something else. Anyway, right now we will just create one with just an ID, and we'll hit fetch. Fetch will go using a get and get data from the server. Since we have the ID set to 1, it'll know what to get. So we set the ID equals 1. No data except for the ID. The response brings in this whole model, and it changes ID, name, and age. Now, final thing we need to look at, we'll just create the full person like that. And now we need to destroy it, which is delete. I don't know, I can't put destroy, that sounds a little more violent. Anyway, so that will sends off the event destroy and sync. Sync is fired after it's synchronized with the server. Headers, it's post again, but the underscore method is delete, and I set the ID, so the server knows to just delete that from the server, from the database. I responded with this. I don't think it was supposed to, but it doesn't really matter as long as it comes back as 200 OK. It doesn't think of it as an error. So, alright, let's stop with the person and move on to collections. So let's create people equals new people. So in a previous video, we had people.add, and then we threw in the data for them there. And we also had people.reset, which allowed you to add multiple people at once, and it overwrote all the models that were currently there. You can, right here, just use fetch, and it will try to get all the models. The thing is, though, Backbone.js, they recommend not using fetch to initialize all the data. It is only afterward, when you need to just switch the data or change the data, that you should use fetch. So what they say you should do to save a round trip to the server and get everything, you should do reset, and then inside, if it's a PHP file, we can add in here, we can echo the models.toJSON, which isn't how it works, but you know. So we just inject the data into there using the server-side language. One thing to note is if you have a URL property here, this one can be a string or a function. What this does is if the model is within the collection, anytime you try to synchronize it with the server, instead of using the URL well, it will still try to use URL root first, at least according to my method, or it can actually get to the URL from the collection. So at this point, I can get rid of URL root here and just put it here and still be able to synchronize it where I want it to be. Personally, I like the URL root up here better, but there are a lot of RESTful APIs where if you're just doing a single model, the root would be model name or whatever, but if you're in the collection, it'd be models. So that would be why you would want to change that. So anyway, I'm going to get rid of this, add my URL root back in here. Alright, so we're going to create a model from here. Now, here's the kicker. Oh, let's go pull this in from my other document. You can only create one at a time. If you have an ID, it'll basically do an update to the server and then pull that data down and inject it as a model. If you don't have an ID, it will do a create, and it will create a new one, and then you can get the ID from the server. Responds back with the full model with the ID. So first we'll try it without the ID. I didn't put a whole lot of work into the server, so I just have it set up to work with JOSM age 23. Is it going? Oh, syntax error. And 24. Why do commas? Always the commas. Alright. So here's the thing. It sent up this model, and the response comes back with an ID in it, so that it will actually have an ID and prove that it was synchronized with the server. Once again, this was just a create, so it was just a post. There was no underscore method. Now if we put the ID in here, that'll change. See, now it has method put, because what it's doing is updating stuff on the server. Responds back with the full model. Did I do fetch? I don't think I did fetch. Nope. So now I have my server set up. I have 4 things in my database. So it's just going to pull those 4 and return them. So anyway, fetch should get all of the models from this URL. This one you actually need a URL for fetch. Oh, I'll show you. See, uncaught error requires a URL. So URL will be the same as before. Backbone.php. There's an error event. Oh, throwing a notice in the back. So anyway, it should be returning just this. So hold on just a second. I will try to fix this real quick. That should do it. Event reset. Response was just this. So it did a get. Didn't need any parameters or anything. So now we can do people.models. And see that we got the 4 models. There's me. And then there's Bob Hope. And Kermit the Frog. And Chuck Norris. So those are the 4 people that were on the server. And that was most of the stuff. I wanted to touch on parse. So you can set a parse function. Basically what this function does is it takes the response from the AJAX call, usually for a get, update, or create. Anyway, it'll take the response and you can convert the response to turn into the attributes array for the model. So basically you would return the object literal that I have been throwing in everywhere. So if the server returned something like an array of this, you would just return response 0 and then it would work because the automatic parsing can convert it straight from that object. But if your data that's being returned doesn't work really well, or say it's returning XML instead of JSON, this would be where you convert it to work with your model. So yeah, that is pretty much all there is to it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe and like, and happy coding. See you next time.